On the morning of the 9th of August, 1945, in an office in Nagasaki, a man with burns down the left side of his body was trying to convince his supervisor of something impossible. His name was Tsutomu Yamaguchi. He was 29 years old, an engineer, and he was wrapped in bandages. And 3 days earlier, he had been standing in the city of Hiroshima when a single bomb erased it. He had come home to Nagasaki, and despite his wounds, he had reported to work because that was what a man did. And now he was standing in front of his director, trying to explain what he had seen. One bomb, one aircraft, and an entire city, in the space of a single flash of light, simply gone. The director did not believe him. Of course he didn't. What Yamaguchi was describing did not fit inside any category of knowledge a person possessed in the summer of 1945. A single bomb that destroys a city is not an exaggeration of a large bomb. It is a different kind of statement about the universe. And so the director listened to this bandaged, feverish man describe the unimaginable, and he concluded that the man had lost his mind. He told him, in so many words, that he was crazy. How could one bomb destroy a whole city? And at that moment, at approximately 11 o'clock in the morning, as Yamaguchi stood mid-sentence trying to make a skeptical man believe a true thing that could not possibly be true, the windows of the office filled with a white light. It was the same light, the identical light. Yamaguchi would say later that his first thought, in the instant before the blast wave arrived, was that the mushroom cloud had followed him from Hiroshima, that the thing he was describing had somehow chased him 300 kilometers across Japan to prove itself. It had not, of course. It was a second bomb, over a second city, dropped by a second aircraft 3 days after the first. But the coincidence of timing is almost too perfect to be borne. A man is calling another man insane for claiming that one bomb can destroy a city at the precise instant that a second bomb destroys a second city around them both. This is the moment this entire story turns on, and we are going to come back to it. Because everything that matters about Tsutomu Yamaguchi is compressed in that office, in that sentence, at that instant. The impossible thing, the disbelief, and the light that arrived to settle the argument. The way this story is usually told is as a curiosity, a statistical freak, the man who survived both atomic bombs. He gets called, depending on the telling, the luckiest man who ever lived or the unluckiest, and both framings do the same quiet work, which is to hold the story at arm's length, to make it a marvel, a coincidence, a thing that happened to defy the odds. Believe that framing and Yamaguchi becomes a kind of trivia answer, the one guy who was in both cities. Isn't that something? What are the chances? That framing is not wrong exactly, the odds really are almost incomprehensible. He was within the radius where most people died instantly, twice. He was close enough to suffer severe radiation exposure, twice. Roughly 165 people are believed to have experienced both bombings, most of them not at the deadly heart of both. And of all of them, Yamaguchi is the only person the government of Japan ever officially recognized as a survivor of both. So yes, the mathematics of his survival border on the impossible, and it is tempting to leave it there as a wonder. But leaving it there misses the actual significance of the man, and the actual significance is this. The atomic bomb is a weapon that works, above everything else, by turning people into abstractions. That is not a metaphor, it is the literal mechanism of the thing. It takes a city of human beings, each of them a specific person, with a name and a face and a family and a morning routine and a reason to be exactly where they were standing at 8:15, and in a fraction of a second it converts them into a number. 80,000 dead at Hiroshima in the first instant, tens of thousands more in the days that followed, around 200,000 across both cities by the time the counting stopped, if it ever really stopped. Those numbers are the bomb's true product, not the fireball, not the cloud, the numbers. The bomb's deepest violence is that it makes individual human death happen on a scale so vast that the individual human disappears into a statistic, and a statistic is a thing you cannot feel. Nobody can grieve 200,000 people. The mind refuses. It rounds them off. And this is why Tsutomu Yamaguchi matters, and why he is not a curiosity, because in one ordinary body the entire abstraction of the nuclear age was compressed back down into a single continuous, feelable human life. He is the one point in all of history where the two bombs, the only two ever used against human beings, converge in a single person you can actually think about. Not 200,000 people. One person, twice. You can hold that, you can feel it, and once you have felt it, once you have imagined standing in a potato field as the sky turns to magnesium, and then imagined doing it again 3 days later in your own hometown, the number stops being a number. It becomes what it always actually was, a person multiplied by 200,000. That is the argument this whole story is going to make, that the way we usually tell it, the luckiest man, the unluckiest man, the incredible coincidence, is a way of not looking at it, and that the real meaning of Yamaguchi's doubled life is that he spent it doing the one thing that is hardest to do with nuclear weapons, and most necessary, keeping them human-sized, refusing to let them be a number. But before he could become that, he had to be an ordinary man. And he was. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was born in Nagasaki in March of 1916, which means that the city he would come home to in ruins was also the city he came from. He was, by every account, an ordinary and capable man of his time and place. He went to a respected technical school, then to the Nagasaki Technical College, where he trained as a naval engineer. And not long after graduating, he took a job with Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, one of the great engines of Japanese industry, where he worked as a draftsman designing oil tankers. Sit with that job for a moment, because it matters to the shape of everything that follows. Yamaguchi was not a soldier. He was not a pilot or a sailor or a man who had chosen the machinery of war. He was a marine engineer who drew ships, enormous, mundane commercial vessels for carrying oil across the sea. He was a man of drawings and specifications and tolerances, a man whose professional life was organized around precision and calculation, and the patient rendering of large, complicated objects into lines on paper. He was, in other words, exactly the kind of person the war was not supposed to be about: a civilian technician, a husband, a new father. Because by 1945 he had a family. He had married a woman named Hisako, and they had an infant son, Katsutoshi, born in 1946. No, that is wrong. The son who would be born after the war was Katsutoshi, and in the summer of 1945 the child was an infant of a different reckoning, waiting at home in Nagasaki with his mother. What matters is the domestic fact of it. A young engineer with a wife and a small child, living an entirely recognizable life, the kind of life that is the actual texture of the world, and that wars are supposedly fought to protect and routinely destroy instead. And here is a detail that the tidy versions of this story tend to leave out, because it complicates the image of the plucky survivor, and because it is genuinely dark. By his own later account, Yamaguchi had opposed Japan's war from the beginning. He never believed his country should have started it. And as the war ground toward its catastrophic end, as the cities burned and the defeat became total and inevitable, he fell into a despair so complete that he later admitted he had contemplated, if Japan lost, using sleeping pills to end the lives of his wife and infant son, and presumably his own, to spare them whatever was coming. That is a terrible thing to have thought, and it would be easy to flinch from it. But it belongs in the story, because it tells you the truth about where Japan was in the summer of 1945, and where this specific, gentle, competent, tanker-drawing man was inside it. This was not a fanatic. This was not a man who wanted death. This was an ordinary father who loved his family and had been driven, by the sheer crushing hopelessness of that moment in history, to imagine the unimaginable as an act of mercy. That is what the last months of the war did to ordinary people. That is the darkness the bomb fell into. Yamaguchi was standing in that darkness, an engineer who drew oil tankers and did not want the war and could not see a future, when Mitsubishi sent him on a business trip. The trip was to Hiroshima. He had been there for 3 months. It was a long assignment,
The summer of 1945 spent away from his family in another city, working the long hours that a major engineering project demands on the design of a new oil tanker. 3 months of drawings and meetings and the particular loneliness of a man living out of a suitcase while his wife and small child wait somewhere else. And on the 6th of August, 1945, it was finally over. That day was supposed to be his last day in Hiroshima. The work was done, or done enough, and he was going home. After a summer away, he was going to get on a train and travel back to Nagasaki and his family. You can feel the shape of that morning, because everyone has had a version of it. The last day of a long trip, the lightness of it, the mind already halfway home, running ahead to the reunion, to the ordinary sweetness of sleeping in your own bed and seeing the faces you have been missing. He was traveling with two colleagues, Akira Iwanaga and Kuniyoshi Sato, fellow Mitsubishi men who had been part of the same assignment. The three of them were making their way toward the train station to begin the journey home. It was a bright summer morning. The city of Hiroshima was going about its business around them, a city that had, strangely, been largely spared the firebombing that had gutted so many other Japanese cities, a city still standing, still full, still whole on a morning that felt like any other. Nobody in Hiroshima knew that they had been spared the firebombing for a specific reason. Nobody knew they had been kept intact to serve as a clean demonstration. Yamaguchi was almost out. He was on his way to the station on the last morning of a long trip, carrying nothing more ominous than the ordinary fatigue of a man who wants to go home. And then he realized he had forgotten something. He had forgotten his hunko. To understand why that small realization is the hinge of the entire story, you have to understand what a hunko is. Because in the calculus of who lived and who died in Hiroshima that morning, this tiny object turns out to weigh more than almost anything else. A hunko is a personal seal, a small stamp carved with a person's name, used in Japan in place of a signature. It is not a trivial thing, and it was even less trivial in 1945. In Japanese administrative life, the hanko was, and to a large extent still is, the physical embodiment of a person's identity and consent. It is what you press onto a document to make it official, to make it yours. Contracts, official forms, and, crucially for a man about to board a train in wartime, travel documents required it. A hunko was not a convenience you could shrug off and replace later. It was, functionally, a piece of your legal self. For a man traveling home, the hunko was the thing that authorized the journey. To forget it was to be, in a bureaucratic sense, unable to properly leave. So Yamaguchi did the small, sensible, utterly mundane thing. He told his colleagues to go on, and he turned around, and he went back to retrieve his stamp. Consider what that decision did. It is worth slowing all the way down here because this is the moment the sample of contingency reveals its whole terrible machinery. Had Yamaguchi not forgotten the hunko, he would have continued toward the station with his colleagues, and he would have been somewhere else entirely at 8:15. Had he not gone back for it, he would not have been where he was. Instead, because of a forgotten name stamp, he was walking back through the city, out in the open, near a field, when the bomb detonated. Which meant that when it came, he was not inside a building that would collapse and burn on top of him. He was in the open, near an irrigation ditch he could dive into. The single most singular survival in the history of the nuclear age, the one man officially recognized as having lived through both bombs, turns at its foundation on a marine engineer forgetting a small carved stamp and going back for it. This is the part of the story that is almost unbearable to think about clearly, because it cuts both ways with equal force. The same contingency that saved Yamaguchi killed other people.
Somewhere in Hiroshima that morning, some other person forgot some other small thing or remembered it, and the forgetting or the remembering put them 100 meters closer to the center, or inside a building instead of beside a ditch, and they died, and Yamaguchi lived, and there is no justice in it, and no reason in it, and no lesson in it. The bomb did not select, it did not weigh the worth of the people beneath it. It fell on a city and killed according to the pure, blind arithmetic of distance and shelter, and the accidents of where each human body happened to be standing at 8:15 in the morning. Accidents produced by 10,000 tiny decisions, like a forgotten hunko, none of which anyone could possibly have known was a decision about life and death. That is the deepest horror of the weapon, and Yamaguchi's forgotten stamp is the clearest lens we have on it. Not the fireball, the randomness, the way an atomic bomb takes the smallest, most meaningless choices of a human life, go back for the stamp, don't go back for the stamp, and retroactively makes them the most consequential choices that person will ever make, without their ever knowing they were choosing. Yamaguchi went back for his hanko. It is the reason there is a story to tell at all. And he had no idea as he walked back through the ordinary morning to fetch a small carved piece of his own name that he had just, by accident, decided to live. At 8:15 in the morning, Yamaguchi was walking back toward the docks, his errand more or less complete, roughly 3 kilometers from the center of the city. He looked up. Later, he would describe seeing the American B-29 in the sky, and beneath it 2 small parachutes drifting down. Those parachutes carried instruments, not the bomb itself, but he could not have known that. He saw the aircraft, and he saw the little parachutes, and then the sky did something that the human sensory system has no prior category for. There was, in his words, a great flash. He compared it to the light of an enormous magnesium flare, a whiteness that consumed the whole world at once. Here his training saved him. Yamaguchi had received naval air raid instruction, and his body responded before his mind could. He threw himself to the ground, rolled into the nearest irrigation ditch, covered his head, locked his fingers over his eyes, and jammed his thumbs into his ears. The reflexive posture drilled into him for exactly this kind of catastrophe, though no drill had ever imagined this. And then the blast wave arrived, and it picked him up out of the ditch and threw him. He was, in his own plain telling, blown over, lifted and hurled by a pressure wave moving out from the detonation faster than sound. When it passed, he was alive, but the bomb had already begun its work on his body. The explosion had ruptured his eardrums, it had temporarily blinded him, and it had burned him severely across the left side of the upper half of his body, the side that had been turned toward the flash. A burn that would take the hearing in his left ear permanently and would keep him wrapped in bandages on and off for years. He was, at that moment, one of the least injured people within 3 kilometers of the hypocenter of the first atomic bomb ever used against human beings. That is what survived means in this context. It does not mean unharmed. It means burned and deafened and blinded and thrown, but still breathing in a place where the overwhelming majority of the human beings around him were not, where the light itself had, in the space of an instant, printed the shadows of vaporized people onto the stone behind them. Yamaguchi crawled, when he could move, toward a shelter, and he rested there in the ruins of the morning, and when he had gathered enough of himself back together, he set out to do the thing that the situation demanded, to find his colleagues and to try to go home. What he had to walk through to do that is the next part of the story, and it is the part that turns a statistic back into a scene. The Hiroshima that Yamaguchi walked through after the bomb was not a damaged city. It was a different order of thing entirely, and the survivors who described it reached again and again for the language of hell because there was no other language available. The fires were still burning and flickering everywhere, the buildings were gone or going, flattened, shattered, aflame,
and the streets were lined with the dead and the dying, with people whose injuries do not need to be described in detail here, and will not be, out of respect for them, but who were suffering in ways that the human body is not supposed to be able to suffer and remain alive. Many of the city's bridges had been twisted into wreckage. The survivors moved through this landscape like sleepwalkers, many of them so badly burned that they were barely recognizable as people, arms held out from their bodies, moving without direction through the ruins of a city that had been whole an hour before. Yamaguchi had to cross a river to reach the train station, and the river, in one of the details from his account that lodges in the mind and does not leave, was not passable in any ordinary sense because it was filled with the bodies of the dead. People had gone into the water to escape the fires, to cool their burns, to die, and the river was carrying them, and there were so many that Yamaguchi, to get across, had to swim through them. A young engineer, burned and half-blind, swimming across a river through a layer of the floating dead, on the last day of what was supposed to be a routine business trip, to get to a train that would take him home. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy and wrong to linger on the horror for its own sake. The point of describing it is not to shock. The point is the opposite. The point is that this is what a number looks like from the inside. When we say 80,000 people died at Hiroshima in the first instant, that is the abstraction, the thing the mind rounds off and files away. Yamaguchi swimming across a river of bodies is the thing the abstraction is made of. Every one of those bodies in that river was a person who had that morning a hunko they might have forgotten, a trip they were about to take, a family somewhere waiting. Yamaguchi's whole later life would be an argument that we are obligated to see the river and not just the number. He earned the standing to make that argument by swimming across it. He reached the station. He found, remarkably, that his colleagues Iwanaga and Sato had also survived, and he boarded a train full of other burned and bewildered and bandaged survivors, all of them fleeing the unspeakable thing that had happened to their city, and he settled in for the overnight journey home to Nagasaki. He was carrying the bomb with him, not knowingly, but in his burned skin and his ruptured ears, and invisibly in the radiation that had already passed through his body, he was carrying Hiroshima toward the one other city on Earth that was about to receive one. The train ran overnight, some 300 kilometers from the ruins of Hiroshima toward Nagasaki. There is a dramatic irony in that journey so heavy that it almost feels designed, though of course nothing about it was. Yamaguchi was fleeing the atomic bomb. He was going home, to safety, to his family, away from the nightmare, traveling as fast as the wartime railways could carry him toward the place he believed was safe. And the place he believed was safe was Nagasaki, which was at that very moment near the top of a short list of Japanese cities that the United States had selected as targets for the second atomic bomb. He was not escaping. He was commuting from one hypocenter to the next. The safest place he could imagine was the second most dangerous place on the planet. While he rode through the night, the world above his head was changing permanently. 16 hours after the Hiroshima explosion, President Harry Truman spoke and told the world for the first time that the weapon existed, that a single American bomb, drawing on the basic power of the universe, had been dropped on a Japanese city, and that if Japan did not surrender, it could expect a rain of ruin from the air the like of which had never been seen on Earth. The nuclear age had been announced, and Yamaguchi, one of the very few people on Earth who already knew in his body exactly what Truman was describing, was asleep or trying to sleep on a train, among the burned, going home. He arrived in Nagasaki early on the 8th of August, and the first thing that happened when he reached his own city carries the thesis of this whole story inside it. He went to a hospital to have his burns treated. The doctor who received him was a former schoolmate, a man who had known Yamaguchi, who knew his face, and the doctor did not recognize him.
The burns had so transformed him that a man who had known him could not tell who he was. And when Yamaguchi finally made it home, feverish and swaddled in bandages, his own mother looked at him and, in her shock, took him for a ghost. She accused him of being a dead thing wearing her son's shape. Hold on to that, because it is not incidental. The bomb had, in a very literal sense, erased Tsutomu Yamaguchi. It had taken his face, the specific, recognizable, individual human face by which the people who loved him knew him, and burned it into something a friend could not identify and a mother took for a spirit. This is, in miniature, exactly what the weapon does. It unpersons people. It takes the individual and dissolves the marks of individuality, the face, the identity, the recognizability, until a man is a ghost to his own mother. The atomic bomb, on the largest scale, turns a city of persons into a number. On the smallest scale, it turned one specific man into someone his mother could not recognize. It is the same act performed at two magnitudes, and the entire rest of Yamaguchi's life would be the reversal of that act, the slow, deliberate, decades-long project of making himself recognizable again, of insisting on the face and the name and the person against a weapon whose whole nature is to erase them. But first, unbelievably, he had to survive it a second time. On the morning of 9th August 1945, 3 days after Hiroshima, 1 day after arriving home, still burned, still bandaged, still feverish, Yamaguchi got up and went to work. It is worth pausing on the sheer, almost incomprehensible sense of duty in that. He had been at the center of an apocalypse. He was wounded, deafened, exhausted, and traumatized in ways that did not yet have names. And he went to the office. He reported to the Mitsubishi shipyard in Nagasaki because he was expected there, because that was what a man of his time and his character did. The same essentially admirable, essentially ordinary work ethic that had kept him in Hiroshima on a 3-month assignment now brought him, bandaged, to the edge of a second hypocenter. The virtues do not protect you. That is one of the quiet cruelties threaded all the way through this. Yamaguchi's diligence, his sense of responsibility, his showing up, the very things that make him sympathetic are also the things that kept placing his body 3 kilometers from ground zero. And so we arrive again at the scene we started with. Yamaguchi is standing in the office in front of his director trying to explain Hiroshima. Understand that he is not describing a large air raid. He is describing something for which his listener has no frame at all. One aircraft, one bomb, one flash, and a city of hundreds of thousands simply gone. He is describing it as a man who was there, who swam the river, whose own mother took him for a ghost. And the director cannot accept it. It is not a failure of imagination on the director's part. It is that the thing being described sits outside the boundary of what a sane person in August 1945 could believe. So the director tells Yamaguchi, in effect, that he must be exaggerating, that he must be confused, that he is talking like a man who has lost his reason. One bomb, a whole city, it cannot be. And at approximately 11:02 in the morning, the same white light Yamaguchi had seen over Hiroshima filled the windows of the Nagasaki office. The second bomb, called Fat Man, dropped from a B-29 named Boxcar, had detonated over the city. And Yamaguchi's workplace, by a repetition so precise it beggars belief, put him again roughly 3 kilometers from the hypocenter, the same distance as Hiroshima, 3 days later, in a different city. His first thought, he said, was that the cloud had followed him, that the horror he had been trying to describe had chased him home to prove itself in front of the man who called him a liar. This time he was not burned. The specifics of why he survived so much better are almost unbearably fine-grained. Nagasaki's hilly terrain shielded parts of the city that Hiroshima's flatness had exposed, and the particular office he was in, with its reinforced stairwell, offered protection the second time that he had not had the first. And there is one more detail, and it is the seed of everything the rest of his life would become. His co-workers, in the seconds before the blast, took cover, dove for the floor, got away from the windows, because they had just been listening to him describe Hiroshima. His testimony, delivered to a room that did not believe him, had told those men, without any of them realizing it, exactly what to do when the light came. He had, in the act of being disbelieved, just saved lives with his account of the first bomb, seconds before the second one arrived to confirm it. That is the whole of it in one room. The witness nobody believes, whose witness turns out to be the thing that protects people. Remember it. It is the argument his entire later life would make. He survived. His bandages, though, were destroyed in the second blast, and he could not find clean replacements in the chaos, and in the days that followed, he developed a raging fever and vomited continuously for over a week as the second dose of radiation moved through a body still reeling from the first. But he was alive. Twice, against odds that do not really have a name. If a story like this, one man made into the single human hinge of the entire nuclear age, is the kind of history you think more people should carry, take one moment to subscribe. It genuinely helps these stories reach the people who have never heard them. Now, what happened to his family, and what happened, slowly, to him? His first thought after the second bomb was the only thought a father could have. He rushed home, terrified of what he would find, because his wife Hisako and his infant son were somewhere in the city that had just been struck. And they were alive. Against the same impossible odds that had carried him through twice, his family had survived the destruction of Nagasaki with only superficial injuries. The nuclear family, the actual literal family, husband and wife and child, had come through the only two nuclear attacks in human history intact. It is on its face a miracle, and it is right to feel the relief of it, the way Yamaguchi must have felt it, staggering home through a second ruined city to find the faces he loved still there. But the bomb does not let you keep even your miracles clean, because his wife had not come through untouched, whatever the surface said. In the aftermath of the Nagasaki explosion, Hisako had been caught in the black rain, the dark, radioactive fallout, thick with the pulverized and irradiated matter of the city that fell in the wake of the detonation. She had been out, by one account, searching for burn ointment for her wounded husband, which is its own small heartbreak. She was exposed to the poison because she was looking for a way to ease his pain. She was, as their daughter would later put it, soaked in the black rain and poisoned by it. The injury did not show. It would take decades to surface. But it was already inside her from that day, the way the first bomb's radiation was already inside Tsutomu. This is the thing about the atomic bomb that the mushroom cloud photographs can never show you, and it is where the story stops being about a single terrible day and becomes about the rest of a life and the lives after that one. The bomb does not finish when the cloud disperses. It moves into the body, and it waits. Tsutomu Yamaguchi survived, and then he kept surviving, which turned out to be its own long ordeal. The immediate aftermath was brutal. The fever, the vomiting, the ruined bandages, the burns that refused to heal. His daughter would recall that her father was wrapped in bandages on and off until she was 12 years old. 12 years! The wounds of a single morning in August 1945 were still being dressed more than a decade later. He lost the hearing in his left ear permanently. He went bald temporarily as the radiation attacked his body. And as the years and then the decades passed, the delayed harvest of a double dose of radiation kept coming. Cataracts clouding his vision, and more seriously, acute leukemia, a cancer of the blood that is one of the signature long-term diseases of radiation exposure. and eventually the stomach cancer that would, at the very end, be the thing that killed him. This is the weapon's most patient cruelty, and it deserves to be named plainly, because it is the part that the word survivor obscures. To survive the atomic bomb is not to escape it, it is to carry it. The radiation that a hibakusha absorbed did not stay in 1945. It moved forward with them through every subsequent year, an invisible passenger, surfacing decades later as this cancer or that one, so that a man could be spared in August of 1945 and still be being killed by August of 1945, 50 years on. The bomb, in this sense, never actually stops going off. It just slows down. It detonates across a whole lifetime, one cell at a time. And it does not stay in one body. This is the part that moves the horror from the individual to the hereditary, and it is the part of Yamaguchi's story that is hardest to bear. The poison reached his family. His wife, Hisako, soaked in the black rain of Nagasaki, lived with lasting health complications for the rest of her life and died in 2008 at the age of 88 of liver and kidney cancer, a death her family understood to be tied across 63 years to the day she went out looking for ointment for her husband's burns. Their son, Katsutoshi, died of cancer in 2005 at the age of 59. Their daughters, Toshiko and Naoko, reported serious health problems throughout their lives. An entire family, across 2 generations, living under the long shadow of 2 mournings, carrying in their cells the residue of weapons that had been used before some of them were even born. Think about what that means for the abstraction we started with. When we count the dead of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we count the people killed in 1945. We do not, cannot, count the son who dies of cancer in 2005, 60 years later, of a poison delivered before his birth. The bomb's true casualty list extends across decades and into descendants, invisibly, unmeasurably. Yamaguchi's family is the visible edge of that invisible list, a single family through which you can see the shape of a harm that the official death tolls will never fully capture. The number, once again, is a lie of omission. The truth is a family, dying slowly across 60 years from a light that came twice. For most of his life, Tsutomu Yamaguchi did not talk about any of this. This is worth understanding, because it is not what the inspirational version of the story would predict. We like to imagine that a man who lived through something so momentous would emerge from it as a witness, immediately, urgently, with a message. Yamaguchi did not. For decades, he kept his head down. When the Japanese government formally established the category of hibakusa, atomic bomb-affected persons, in 1957, and Yamaguchi was recognized as a survivor, his official identification listed only Nagasaki. His presence in Hiroshima 3 days earlier at the first bomb went unrecorded for another half-century, and by most accounts he was content with that. He was relatively healthy, he had a life to rebuild, and he chose, as so many of his generation chose, to put the experience behind him and simply live. There were reasons for that silence deeper than personal preference, and they belong in this story because they are part of what the bomb did. To be a hibakusha in post-war Japan was to carry a stigma. Survivors were often feared and shunned, treated in the cruel logic of a traumatized society, almost as if the radiation were contagious, as if the misfortune might spread. They faced discrimination in employment and painfully in marriage. Families worried that the children of hibakusha might carry hidden damage, that the poison might be hereditary, a fear that was not entirely baseless, as Yamaguchi's own family showed, but that translated into ordinary human cruelty against people who had already suffered more than most. So many survivors learned to hide it, to not mention where they had been on those mornings,
to fold the worst thing that ever happened to them into silence and carry it privately, because speaking of it could cost them a job, a marriage, a place in ordinary life. There is a broader truth here about the generation that fought and endured the Second World War on every side, the vast characteristic silence of the people who came through the worst of the 20th century and then did not speak of it, sometimes for the rest of their lives. Yamaguchi was in this entirely typical. He had a story that almost no one else on Earth could tell, and for decades he did not tell it. He rebuilt. He worked, first as a translator for the American occupation forces. There is a strange grace in that, a man who had been twice beneath American bombs, now serving as a bridge of language between the occupied and the occupied, and then as a school teacher, and then back at Mitsubishi, drawing oil tankers again, as though the thread of the ordinary life the bombs had cut could simply be picked up and continued. And in a sense, it could. He raised his daughters. He grew older. He kept his silence. And then, late in his life, he broke it. And the reason he broke it is the reason this story exists. As Yamaguchi grew old, something in him shifted. His opinions about nuclear weapons, which he had held privately and quietly, hardened into something he could no longer keep to himself. And in his 80s, an old man now, a man who had outlived the overwhelming majority of his fellow hibakusha, a man who had carried 2 bombs in his body for more than half a century, he began, at last, to speak. He wrote a memoir of his experiences. He wrote poetry, tanka, the compressed traditional Japanese form, a fitting vessel for a man trying to hold enormous things in small spaces. And in 1906, he took part in a documentary film about the roughly 165 people believed to have survived both bombings, the Niju Hibakusha, the twice bombed, a film that was screened at the United Nations. And at that screening, this quiet engineer who had spent most of his life not talking stood up in front of the assembled representatives of the nations of the world and pleaded with them to abolish nuclear weapons. What he said across the various interviews and appearances of his final years is worth hearing in his own compressed words, because he had thought about it more deeply than almost anyone alive was in a position to. He said that the reason he hated the atomic bomb was because of what it does to the dignity of human beings. Sit with that, because it is the whole argument in a single sentence, and it is the argument this entire piece has been circling. Not what it does to bodies, though he knew that better than nearly anyone, what it does to dignity. The bomb unpersons people. It turns them into shadows on stone, into numbers in a tally, into ghosts their mothers cannot recognize. Its deepest violence is against the very thing that makes a human being, rather than its statistic. And Yamaguchi, who had been unpersoned twice and had spent a lifetime becoming a person again, understood that with a clarity available to no one else. He said, too, that he could not understand why the world could not understand the agony of the nuclear bombs, how, knowing what he knew, having been where he had been, the nations of the earth could keep developing these weapons. It is the bewilderment of a man who has seen the thing itself, watching the rest of us treat it as an abstraction, as a strategic counter, as a number. He was trying with the last strength of a very old man to make us feel what he could not stop feeling. And he understood exactly why his particular voice mattered, and he said that too. He explained that having experienced the atomic bombings twice and survived, it was his destiny to talk about it. Not his choice quite, his destiny. He came to see his impossible doubled survival not as luck, good or bad, but as an assignment. He had been placed, by whatever forces place a man in a potato field in Hiroshima and an office in Nagasaki 3 days apart, in the one position from which the whole of the nuclear age could be witnessed and testified to by a single human being. And late in his life, he accepted that assignment. When his double exposure was finally officially recognized, he said what the recognition meant to him, that his double radiation exposure was now an official government record, and that it could tell the younger generation the horrifying history of the atomic bombings even after he died.
He was, quite consciously, turning himself into a document, making himself into evidence that would outlast him, ensuring that the number would always, somewhere, have a face and a name attached to it, his. The official recognition came in March of 2009, the government of Japan formally acknowledging at last that Tsutomu Yamaguchi had been present at both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the only person ever to receive that recognition. He was already dying of stomach cancer by then. In December of 2009, the film director James Cameron and the author Charles Pellegrino visited the old man in his hospital bed in Nagasaki to talk about telling the story of nuclear weapons to the world. And a few weeks later, on the 4th of January 2010, Tsutomu Yamaguchi died at the age of 93 of the last of the cancers the bombs had planted in him 65 years before. He had outlived both explosions by nearly 2/3 of a century. Everything after August 1945 he had come to feel was borrowed, a bonus, a stretch of life he had not expected to have. And he had spent the end of that borrowed time giving it away, turning it into testimony, so that the rest of us might be forced, through him, to feel a thing we would very much rather round off and forget.
So let us go back one last time to the office in Nagasaki on the morning of the 9th of August 1945. A bandaged man is standing in front of a skeptical director, trying to make him believe an impossible thing, that one bomb destroyed an entire city. The director cannot believe it. It is too large, too outside the boundary of the thinkable. He tells the man he is crazy, and at that exact moment the white light comes through the windows, and the impossible thing proves itself, and the argument is settled forever. That scene is the whole of it, because the argument in that office is the argument that the entire world has been having in one form or another ever since. One side says this weapon is too terrible to be real in the way you are describing. Surely you are exaggerating. Surely it cannot be as absolute as all that. And the other side, the side Yamaguchi was on, the side he was on because he had been beneath the light and swum the river and been mistaken for a ghost by his own mother, says, no, it is exactly as absolute as I am telling you. I have seen it. And the terrible thing about that argument is that the only way to definitively win it, the only way to make the disbeliever truly understand, is for the light to come through the windows again, for it to be proven, as it was proven in that office, by another city, another 200,000 people, another set of numbers that were really a set of faces. Yamaguchi spent the last years of his life trying to win that argument without the light coming through the windows again. That is the actual meaning of his testimony, and it is why he is not a curiosity, not the luckiest or unluckiest man, not a piece of trivia about the one guy who was in both cities. He made himself into the proof, so that we would not need the proof to arrive a third time. He took the abstraction that the bomb creates, the number, the statistic, the 200,000 that the mind cannot hold, and he compressed it back down into one body, one name, one face that his own mother once could not recognize, and he stood in front of the world and said, "This is what it is. This is what it does. It did it to me twice, and it will do it to your cities and your children and your mothers exactly the same way, because it does not care who you are, and the only thing standing between it and that future is whether you can be made to remember in your body and not just your ledgers what it actually means. The number is the lie the bomb tells. The person is the truth. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was, for 65 borrowed years, the person, the single human being through whom the whole unbearable truth of the nuclear age can be seen at a scale a human heart is actually capable of feeling. That was his destiny, as he called it, not to have survived, to have witnessed, and to have refused at the very end of a long and quiet life to let the rest of us look away. He forgot his hanko and went back for it and lived.
And then he spent the life he had accidentally kept, making sure that the two cities behind him would never become just a number, that they would always, as long as his story is told, have his face. If the idea that the largest horrors in history only become real when they are compressed back down into a single human life, a forgotten stamp, a river, a bandaged man in an office as the light comes through the windows a second time, is the kind of history that changes how you carry what you already knew, subscribe. These stories are not made of numbers, they are made of people, and the people are where the truth is.